Chapter 15. He felt good under his covers, warm and rested. He wanted to stay there. His headache had gone, and his cuts and sores now had that slight burning feeling that wasn't so sharp or painful anymore. He drifted in and out of sleep for as long as he could, ignoring John's feet stomping heavily on the floor. Often he'd pass, telling him to wake, then stop and pull his toe or ankle. Then for a moment it was nice again, and he lifted his knees up high and slept. "Am I the only one awake?" John said from the balcony, drinking coffee. "Today is our first day. We get a 12-hour shift in the kill room." Anders peeked from his covers. Behind John's blurry image, he saw the dark sky was becoming lighter. He closed his eyes again and listened to the sounds of a new day, of voices outside, of car engines ticking, of birds chirping and fluttering in the trees. A minute passed, then another. John seemed to have given up, but then his feet began stomping again. "Up, up, up," he said now, charging, almost running into the room. "No one is listening to me." He leaned over Anders, spraying him with coffee breath. "You're not sleeping in. You're not spoiling this for me." He pulled the covers. "Get up now, boy. Hands off your cock. Feed on this sock." He stuffed a dirty sock inside Anders' mouth and stood up, watching him cough and splutter. "You're not listening to me, so you deserve that." He walked away but came straight back again. "Why is no one listening to me?" Anders spat out the sock. He looked at it on the floor, face squinting like a woken gerbil. Then John's hands were over him, grabbing his blanket, snatching it away. Soon as it was on the floor, he tried grabbing the sheet, but Anders had twisted it round himself, like a crocodile doing a death roll. "This is our first day," John said. "I'm not turning up late." He pulled on the sheet, unravelling Anders' body, dragging it away from him, standing with it on the decking. He drank more coffee while Anders curled up in his underpants, hugging his pillow. "Don't you dare go back to sleep," he said. "I'll take that too." He folded his arms and kept talking. "This coffee is good. I'm enjoying it where I am, but it won't stop me. I'll sort you again if needs must." He waited a few moments, standing the same way, finishing his coffee. Then with shoes in hand, he strode across the room and opened the door, heading out into the corridor. "Get up, you lazy bastards!" He ran back in. "Get up!" Quickly he staggered out again, leaving the door wide open. "Get up!" he screamed. "What was that?" Andrew said under his covers. "What just happened?" Anders said nothing. He lay on his mattress for a while, gently moving his fingers over his upper arm, feeling the sticking plaster. Nurse Fudge got him good, he thought, trying to forget the image of his reflection in that mirror. Then he rolled over and stood wearily, wandering to the kitchen top, yawning and moving his hand over his face, and smiling, seeing 2 mugs of dark, thick coffee, as John always made it, like molasses. He smelt the coffee, wearing the expression of an anguished child, one tasked with eating stewed cabbage or lumpy potatoes. Regretfully, he tasted it. Rabbit droppings and cigar ash was not a flavour he was familiar with, he thought. Though, if he was, the combination would be similar, or pretty damn close at least, to John's coffee. Ditching the coffee for a glass of water, he went to the tree and glanced up, as he did every morning, hoping to see the possum. It wasn't there. He drank from his glass and sat down, leaning forward, seeing the fading darkness in the sky. No moon, no clouds in sight now, just blue sky, and over the distant hills the orange glow of sunrise. He glanced at the road. It had rained during the night, and was not yet dusty. Workers walked on it, looking tired and gloomy, heading towards the meat factory's gates, their heads down, their knapsacks over their shoulder. Some men came the other way, walking sluggishly after a long night shift, their stooped, worn-out bodies dragging themselves home, some holding bottles of beer to their lips, drinking slowly. Andrew watched him, watching the workers. He leaned out of bed, his hair stuck up, his blanket across one shoulder. "How are you going to cope today?" he said. "You know, being a vegetarian." "Cope," Anders said, standing up in his underpants. "I always cope. I coped yesterday. I coped fine." "Well," Andrew said, rubbing his eyes, "you did scream 3 times. "It wasn't 3. It bloody was." "You're making stuff up." Anders folded his arms. "Stop it, now!" Okay, Andrew laughed. Pass me that brew and I won't mention it again. Anders tucked the other mug and held it for him, waiting while he yawned and then cupped his hands around it. So what happened the other night? He then asked Anders. I can't remember. Anders picked up his combat shorts and stepped into them. It began with that Steve. I blame you for that. I'm sure if you asked nicely he would have left. I tried that. That bit I do remember. Both then paused. Noises came from underneath the lower bunk. They listened to something rolling like a glass bottle. What was that? Andrew put down his mug and looked at Anders. God knows, Anders said. Probably rats, knowing this place. Rats or giant cockroaches. I agree. Could be anything like that knowing this place. Andrew threw back his covers and sat forward, both feet touching the floor. It could be anything like that, he said, still wearing yesterday's jeans that he'd slept in all night, as he often did, and was now reaching into an open suitcase, moving his hands roughly through heaps of crumpled clothes. There's something you're not telling me, though, he said, selecting a worn t-shirt. There's really nothing to tell. Anders leaned over the sink, washing his dirty hair. We drank and we smoked. But Henry left after that, so it got weird. That's when he did what he did. Did what? Put LSD in my drink. Sent me on a major trip. Anders walked up and down the room, rubbing a towel over his head. Right, Andrew said. The nakedness makes sense now. Bet you did all kinds of crazy stuff. Possibly, Anders said, now wearing a checkered shirt, messing with its buttons. But I can't remember. Well, there's the odd hallucination, but that's it. First trip, was it? Yes, my first and will be my last. And before you ask, flying elephants are no cliché. There was fucking hundreds of them. There was... Anders went quiet. He stared downwards, holding his pumps by the laces. Then he was kneeling beside the spare bunk and moving John's dirty socks out of the way. He frowned. He touched the floor with his fingers. What do you think did that? Andrew said, coming close, sitting beside him. Have they always been there? Can't say I've noticed. There's always so much stuff on the floor. Anders felt the marks with his thumb. Creepy though. Very creepy. What do you think made them? Not sure. Rats? Be some big bloody rats. Big scratch marks, them. Look how deep they go. Odd, Anders said. Odd marks, aren't they? And though he guessed Andrew was thinking the same thing, he just couldn't seem to say it. But he was almost certain, to him, they were human scratch marks. A thin woman with grey hair stood outside their room, as though she'd been listening at the door. Her skin was blotchy and marked with red and white dots, like she'd had many years of sun exposure. Her cardigan sagged on her small shoulders, smelling badly of cigarettes, urine and cat food. They moved away from her, and she dipped her head crying, rubbing her eyes with tissues. Her hands, Anders noticed, were like the rest of her, old and frail, with purple veins going in all directions, like roots of a tree. Often he wondered if Dickie had named the old crow after her. Maybe it was her nickname. Boys, she said, stuttering and staring, eyes redder than a badger's arsehole. Boys! But before she could say any more, Andrew cut in. Babs, please, we're already late. But it's my Dickie, she said, carrying on regardless. Have either of you seen him? They looked at each other, shaking their heads. Why? Andrew asked. He's missing, she said. I haven't seen him since yesterday morning, just before I subbed you that $120 for him. She pointed at Anders. I heard what you did, she said. Don't worry, I don't judge. Andrew looked at the carpet, then either side of the corridor. Maybe he stepped out, he said. You know, stayed with a friend. He never does that. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue. He would have told me. Well, Andrew said, just wait a bit longer. It was as though she didn't hear him. She'd taken a cigarette from its carton and was staring at it between her trembling fingers. Anders stared too. He was thinking about the $120 and the fact that John and Andrew had used him to make a nice profit. If he doesn't show by tonight, Andrew said, we'll go search for him, okay? There was no response. She held the cigarette in her mouth and felt her pockets for matches. When she took them out, they rattled in their box, and she struggled to select one. Andrew took them for her. He struck one edge of the box and held it while she bobbed her head down, nodding, taking quick drags on the cigarette. Grey smoke appeared through her tense nostrils, matching the colour of her hair and cardigan. Then she stared forward, not looking at either of them.
"I'm afraid," she said. "Apparently, there's a madman in town."